from civilization? What discovery could tempt us to start a new life in the untamed wild?
Bugsnax, half bug, half snack. Folks eat them, and then body horror ensues. Yeah, this game is kinda weird. But 2020's favorite Snack 'em Up gave us the perfect opportunity to dive into the world of character creation. Because I mean, look, the small team at Young Horses basically had the opportunity to create their very own universe of monsters. Like Monster Hunter, but chewier. Like Pokemon, but gooier. Surely the dream of every young kid sitting in the back of class drawing imaginatively weird characters. Only this is a commercial product with animations and voice acting. So today we're going to focus on the process of creating a Bugsnak, how the team decided which ones made the cut, how they named them, designed them, and crucially, how they made sure these creatures worked in tandem with the various research and capture devices to make fun, often emergent, gameplay challenges. Okay, suddenly I'm feeling quite hungry, so I guess it's time I left you in the far more capable hands of Young Horses game designer, John Murphy.
Hi, I'm John Murphy from Young Horses, and I'm going to teach you how to design a Bugsnak. So Bugsnax is a game about Bugsnax, which are half bug and half snack creatures, and you play as a journalist following in the footsteps of a charismatic Bugsnax hunter who's found these mysterious Bugsnax and has called you to follow her and her followers to this island. When you get there, the colony is sort of in ruins. The Bugsnax hunter, Lisbert Megafig, is missing, and all of her followers are sort of scattered around. You have to sort of take on the role of becoming the new Bugsnax hunter while also being a journalist and figuring out what happened here, what are Bugsnax, and sort of bring this group of characters back together.
Hey, how's it going?
Usually that involves you having to capture Bugsnax for them. Strabby. The first Bugsnak that you come across in the game is the Strabby. Basically, a strawberry with googly eyes that's sort of turned upside down. It's supposed to be modeled after an aphid. It's kind of aphid-shaped, sort of triangular. Is a very simple Bugsnak. It basically just teaches you how to use your sort of basic trap and your sort of basic tools for catching Bugsnax. You start the game with your snack scope, which is basically a camera that you use to scan and get information about the various Bugsnax, and it also highlights paths that a Bugsnak might be walking on. With the Strabby, it's teaching you how to scan a Bugsnak and see its movement patterns, and then early in the game you also get the snack trap. It looks kind of like a wooden umbrella. It's sort of just like an exaggerated version of like a animal trap thing that you imagine with where there's like a box with a stick in it where you pull the stick out and it falls. Like we started with that as kind of like the basic idea, but like with a remote control thing. So the Strabby basically just teaches you how to use those two very simple tools, like see where it's walking, put a trap in its path, it walks in, you catch it. That's kind of the simplest case Bugsnak catching mechanic with the simplest Bugsnak design.
Bunger!
So the Bunger is the first Bugsnak that you come across that interacts directly with the player instead of just sort of timidly running away from the player. And the Bunger is, of course, a cheeseburger with curly fries for legs and sort of like doesn't understand its own strength, so it punts things around and runs into stuff, but it's not like aggressive and angry. It's like a puppy, basically, just like that sort of attitude. The Bunger is there in the tutorial of the game to teach you that Bugsnax will approach and crash into sauces that they like, or just like, you can lead them around with sauces. So you meet Wambus, who is a farmer, and is Bunger causing chaos at his farm. So he wants you to wrangle the Bunger. So he gives you the sauce slinger, which is the slingshot that you can use to sort of shoot sauces around and coat things in sauces to get Bugsnax to go where you want them to go and do things that you want them to do. The Bunger is there to teach you, oh, it likes ketchup. You want to get it into this pen, you create a breadcrumb trail of ketchup, and the Bunger goes into the pen.
Thanks, stranger.
Later in that same area, you learn that the Bunger not only can just follow splats of ketchup on the ground, if you throw ketchup on a bush that another Bugsnak is hiding in, the Bunger will go and try to play with it and crash into it and bounce off, and the Bugsnak that's hiding in the bush will run out. And that gives you an opportunity to catch it. I mentioned earlier there was trying to represent bugs, trying to represent snacks, trying to get all the mechanics we want in. The naming is a whole other thing, where if we could come up with like a clever combination of a bug and a snack, we would do it. There were some names where we just liked them. Bunger was just a name we came up with early and couldn't give it up. There are a lot of conversations and arguments about bug names, but clearly the Bunger is not the most egregious example of just yeah, we just thought that was funny. That award probably goes to the Scoopy Banoopy, which is the banana split that's kind of modeled after a water beetle. Tom Taylorson, the voice of Octodad, voiced the Bunger and did a wonderful job.
Bunger!
Lollive. I really like the Lollive, which is a flying olive that has the little pimento sticking out. That pimento shoots out like a tongue. Some wires, I think, got crossed in the design of that because it's labeled after a fly, but it has a tongue like a frog, and I think that happened because you associate frogs with flies, so then this fly ended up with this frog-like tongue, which doesn't really make any sense. There isn't really, as far as I'm aware of, there aren't any insects that have a tongue like that, but it was just kind of fun. We have some Bugsnax that pick up things, whether it's your trap or other Bugsnax or just random things in the environment. That was one of the early ideas of a mechanic that a Bugsnak could have that would allow it to have interesting, surprising interactions with other Bugsnax. The first Bugsnak that had that mechanic was Crapple, which is a crab apple that would pick things up or dig things out of the sand. And it was fun to have something that picks stuff up. We're trying to create these sort of intersections of all the different mechanics and remix these sort of modular pieces. So if Crapple is walking on the ground and picks stuff up, I wanted one that is flying and picks stuff up. Sandopede. Sandopede. The Sandopede is one of the more complicated bug designs. It's not just one Bugsnak, it's 4 that just sort of follow each other in a line. The logic of getting the Sandopede to have each segment of the sandwich, it's basically like a big party sub cut into pieces where each one of them is kind of a pretty substantial big Bugsnak to begin with, so it just sort of trundles through. It's basically a train that will run over anything that gets in its way. So getting the logic of Sandopede to work, if you say remove or catch one of the pieces in the middle for everything else to rearrange and figure itself out, it's actually kind of like a miniature version of one of the boss bugs, the Mega Maki, which is a giant sushi sea serpent. Works very similarly, so that's another example of sort of taking a mechanic several Bugsnax that all follow each other in a train and taking it and putting it somewhere else. If you throw a sauce on the Sandopede that the Lollive likes, because of the sort of pimento cheese sort of idea, or olives are on a cheese board, we made it so that the Lollive is attracted to the cheese sauce. So if you throw the cheese onto the Sandopede, the Lollive will come and just pick one of the pieces out of the line, and then the rest of the Sandopede has to figure out how to reform itself. Most of the time you take your trip shot and you lay it across the path of the Sandopede, and when the head gets stunned, all of its followers detect that, and they all sort of go flying and explode, that was a very late addition that I had added to the Mega Maki to make knocking it out of the air feel more exaggerated and exciting. And then sort of in the last like month or so before release, I was like, oh, I should apply that to the Sandopede also. Just feels like a fun little explosion with some nice chaos if you hit the whole thing. Weenyworm. So the Weenyworm is kind of earthworm-like, but it moves more like a snake. So there are some situations where it's like, yeah, this looks like a bug, but we borrowed some sort of like Chris was inspired by other animals for just like interesting movement patterns or something. We had this problem early on in designing Bugsnax where we didn't want the player to get too close to them. We wanted the game to be a little bit more mellow and slower paced and about sort of watching and waiting and like planning, and less about just like running full speed at them. The Weenyworm early on was kind of tricky because we didn't want it to like hide in bushes. We didn't want it to dig underground like other Bugsnax do that. The Weenyworm is on a circular path, and it is able to try to avoid the player but stay on the path. So it's kind of like the thing where like there's like a table or some obstacle between two people, and one is trying to chase the other, and you're kind of like running around in circles always trying to stay opposite. The Weenyworm was controversial because it's attracted to ketchup. We're in Chicago here, and putting ketchup on hot dog is a no-no here. I pushed really hard to later in the game have the shy Weenyworm, which is modeled after a Chicago dog, where unlike the Weenyworm that is attracted to ketchup, I'll let players find out what happens if they throw ketchup on the shy Weenyworm. Pineantula. One of the 100 factors that we were trying to take into account when designing these things, like, do we like the name? Does it sound good out loud? Does it read appropriately? And like the Pineantula was one where it's like, it might not visually read right, but you can hear it say its names, so that helps a bit. But the Pineantula was modeled after a trapdoor spider, and it's one of the only Bugsnax that digs underground, but you can throw sauce at it because it doesn't go all the way underground. It's sort of like top is sticking up. And that was designed sort of in conjunction with the crapple that I was talking about. It's kind of interesting to think about the sort of primary interaction or sort of like use of a particular Bugsnak mechanic. The crapple is able to dig things out of the ground. So we wanted something in the sort of beach-themed level where you first encounter the crapple. We wanted something for a Bugsnak for it to dig out of the ground. There was an earlier version where the Pineantula had a burrow that it stayed stationary in, but that wasn't quite as fun as just having it sort of digging around the level. Because earlier on, Bugsnax were more stationary, and it required a little bit more of like here's a Bugsnak over here, here's another Bugsnak over here. The player just comes and does a thing, and then those two will come together or interact. That sort of mechanic of having sauces that Bugsnax would be drawn to, that you could use to like get them to go places, was because early on when we had Bugsnax being able to like interact with each other a lot without the sauces sort of bringing them together, there'd be a lot of action happening off screen where Bugsnax would be like picking each other up and throwing each other around and all this stuff, and the player like wouldn't see it happen, wouldn't know it was happening. And so we wanted to prevent that, but we did still want to keep the ability that can create chain reactions of a lot of Bugsnax interacting with each other. So that was a tricky thing to find the balance for, where it felt like the world was alive and all the Bugsnax were interacting with each other, but without all that action happening off screen in a way that would either confuse the player or make the player feel like they missed out on something. Peelbug. The Peelbug, that's one of my favorites. It is a I don't know. There's so many names for the Peelbug, or like the roly-poly is what I knew it as here in the Midwest growing up. You know, little guys that roll up in a ball, and they are citrus. So peel, like, you know, lemon peel, orange peel. So the first one you come across is the orange Peelbug, which is an orange, and it's there to teach you how to use the buggy ball, which is a little hamster ball with a Strabby named Sprout that one of the characters in the game is trained this Bugsnax to follow your laser pointer. So you've got this little hamster ball that you can send into little holes and crevices in different areas in the game. And the Peelbug runs out. We sort of just took that idea and hid Peelbugs in other levels, just like variations on the Peelbug. But the interesting differences between them are more related to the level design. There are Peelbugs hiding in tunnels that like traverse half a level, so you have to like figure out where. You might not know when you send the buggy ball into the hole where the Peelbug is hiding. You don't know where it's gonna come out. Put the exit behind a hidden breakable wall, so that you both need to find this sort of like secret room and figure out the layout of the level in order to catch the Peelbug. So the Peelbugs are kind of, they're a little bit unique. There aren't that many Bugsnax that require specific level design around them. Shishkabug. The Shishkabug is another Bugsnak that was designed really early on. Probably one of the Bugsnax that's gone through the most iteration. The Shishkabug is a shish kebab with, depending on which version of it, there are a few different versions. And the first one is, I think it's just like a piece of meat and a tomato and a mushroom. And it's an ant. So it has like that very, it's well suited for that very like segmented way that an ant looks, where it's the abdomen and the thorax and the head, like you almost can't tell how they're attached because they get so skinny. Yeah, the Shishkabug went through so many design iterations. At one point in the tutorial, it was stealing Wambus's garden tools and carrying them into bushes. But where we landed was we wanted something to teach. Like I mentioned earlier with the Bunger, it's kind of, it gives you an idea of how all these things are interconnected. That I couldn't talk about the Bunger without talking about the Shishkabug, and I can't talk about the Shishkabug without talking about the Bunger. When you come into the level, it basically runs and hides in bushes, and it's there to teach you. Some Bugsnax won't come out of hiding, or otherwise won't be catchable without getting another Bugsnak in the mix. Praying Picantis.
Picantis.
It's designed after a praying mantis, but it's made out of a collection of Tex-Mex foods. So for some reason, there's a Cheepoof in there, which is the Cheeto moth, just because it was a good shape for the body of the mantis. And there's a couple of tacos and a burrito. So this is one of the Bugsnax in the game that were originally sort of thought of as like mini bosses, kind of a big Bugsnak that you can either catch on its own, or you can do something to it to have it break apart into several smaller Bugsnax, some of which you can't get anywhere else other than them breaking it apart. But it was really hard to communicate how you would break this sort of like aggregate bug of the Picantis into its pieces. For a while, we were like, okay, for these like aggregate big bugs, you maybe stun them, and then if you have something stun them a second time while they're already stunned, maybe that'll break them apart. That's the sort of thing where it's like, oh, that makes sense to me as a designer, but like it's really hard to actually communicate that. The Scoopy Banoopy is very similar to the Praying Picantis. That they're sort of mirror opposites, where the one is a desert spicy foods Bugsnak, and the other is like a frozen treat. The Scoopy Banoopy is a banana split, and when you break it apart, you get banoppers, which are banana grasshoppers, and an ice cream cone, and the Scoopy, and the Cheery, which is just, the Cheery is one of my, I like it, but it makes me mad because The cheery is a cherry that just like has like a spring-shaped like green stem, and it's inverted, kind of similar to the Strabby, and it just like bounces around. It's like a pure mascot. It's like a cherry is barely a food even, or it's barely a snack, a single cherry. So yeah, with the praying Picantis and the Scooby Banoopy, the stun them twice to break them apart didn't work. So what we decided to do was to make it so the Scooby Banoopy was always this like frosty bug. They're bugs that are like frozen, and you need to melt them. Otherwise, like they'll freeze you if you touch them, or they'll cause your trap to become brittle and shatter if you try to catch them. So you need to melt them before you can catch them. So what we decided to do with that one was when you melt it, it like becomes enraged and is basically like a time bomb, where eventually it will break apart. But you have about 20 seconds to try to stun it or otherwise make it vulnerable for you to catch it before it breaks apart. Kind of last minute, we're like, oh, let's apply that to the praying Picantis also. The praying Picantis, until a couple months ago, wasn't a like fiery bug where you need to extinguish them, otherwise they'll set you and your traps and other bugs and everything else on fire. But at least, you know, it's okay to make a bug a little bit harder to catch as long as the way that you need to catch it is made more clear. Snaquiri. The Snaquiri is weird in that we wanted something that just like jumps out of the water in Simmering Springs, which is sort of like a hot springs beach level. So we wanted something to like be hiding in these geysers and like in the water and like just sort of hopping out of the water. And they're basically just meant to be a use for your launch pad, which is a launch pad that you can use to throw stuff into the air. That one was tricky because I needed to find a way for the player to see like, oh, this Bugsnak is jumping out of the water and I need to catch it when it's in the air. But the player can just walk up to where it's jumping out of the water. So I need to find a way for you to not be able to just cheese it by just putting your trap where it jumps out of the water. There are a lot of Bugsnaks that basically have a force to knock everything away from them when something happens. So like your trap, it won't work basically. Your trap will get knocked away as it's jumping out. They're basically designated as evasive until they're in a particular state. A good example of that is Chippy, which is a chocolate chip cookie that just like runs through the whole level very quickly, and it'll just like dart away if you get anywhere near it. So that idea of basically having a bug that's invulnerable to being captured unless it's put in a certain state. It's pretty isolated until you knock it off course. And then it borrows a little bit from from the burrowing Bugsnax actually. So it's like a combination of a bug that is in the air that you need to throw your trap at to catch, combined with the idea of Bugsnak that burrows underground. Snakpod. Every biome in the game has a variety of Snakpod, like the crispy Snakpod, which is just a bag of chips. There's another one that's a bag of pretzels, or a bag of gummy grumps, which is kind of like gummy bears, but they're grumpus shaped. We wanted some more just easy like gimmies, where like not every Bugsnak took several minutes to figure out how to get them. I was kind of inspired for those by the Skulltulas in like old Zelda games, where the little guys that like make little like rustling noises and are just like hidden in corners and behind walls. And we wanted something that you needed to look around for, but once you found them, you could just pick them up. And I also just think that they're funny because like they're just totally helpless. They're just bags of chips and stuff with googly eyes, and you just grab them. And when you bring them and put them in Gramble's ranch back in Snacksburg, they're just so funny that they're just like, it's just a bag of chips sitting on the ground. Obviously, with a team our size and the sort of scope of what we can do, we could not fully do the thing that Breath of the Wild did, where there's like all these different ways that you can achieve something. You know, the sort of thing where it's like, oh, you need to like set this thing on fire to open this door or whatever, and there's just like a bunch of different ways to do it because like it's just like a fully systemic system. I wanted to kind of think about the different traps where there's a loose association. Like there's like maybe one obvious way to catch a Bugsnak. It's like, oh yeah, you got the chippy cookie running really fast through the level, so the trip shot where you lay a tripwire in front of it to stun it, that's like the obvious way to do it. But you could also take your launch pad and launch that bug into the air. You can launch it at another Bugsnak that then like crashes into it and stuns it. I wanted the link between solution to catching Bugsnak and Bugsnak to be pretty loose, and for there to be multiple ways to catch most of the Bugsnaks. Some of us like really wanted to have a wide variety of foods. Like we didn't want to have like way too many sweets or like way too many salty snacks, or like have like there'd be like 30 different sandwiches. I went to school for biology originally, so I like have a lot of like opinions about insects and other arthropods and invertebrates that I wanted to see in there. So it's like I want to make sure that there's like a millipede and a centipede, because those are very different. Want some spiders, but not too many spiders. Definitely want an ant in there. And then there are also some situations where we just like, okay, we need every level to have a couple of flying Bugsnaks. So like, or we want something aggressive in this level, or something that shoots projectiles at you, or something that moves really quickly. And then sometimes that sort of like game mechanic first, we'd start there, be like, okay, well, what food could that be? And then what bug could that be? Sometimes it's like, we want this bug, what food could look like that? Chris did a really good job of having the designs of the Bugsnaks, the visual designs of them, communicate pretty well what they might do. Bugsnaks that are bigger seem a little bit more threatening, and usually are more aggressive. For example, the Spuddy, the baked potato, like has like big horns and like has like, you know, you can tell that it's not friendly because it has like angry looking eyes. The googly eyes look angrier on some of those. Like you mentioned snails, like the Snail, which is a cinnamon roll. It'll run from you, but it runs so slowly that it doesn't matter. So I think in a lot of cases, we did an okay job of communicating the way a Bugsnak would behave with just the visual design of the Bugsnak. But of course, we also had to play test to figure out what people did and didn't expect. The problem of needing to like teach what each Bugsnak is going to do, since they're all pretty different, right? It's not like, oh, here's like another guy who's going to shoot at me but is bigger or something. I hope that it ends up helping that we took all these ideas of like, this Bugsnak is on fire, this Bugsnak can fly, this Bugsnak burrows under the ground, and there's maybe 12 things like that, and we like recombine them in different iterations so that there's a large variety of there's 100 Bugsnaks that you can get out of that. But maybe because they're like, oh, I've seen that part of this Bugsnak on that one, and this other aspect of this new Bugsnak on another Bugsnak that I've seen before, so that everyone isn't totally bewilderingly new and confusing. Thanks so much for watching. Bugsnax is available on PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, and the Epic Game Store, and I hope you play it and like it.
Weenyworm. Twinkle, 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 twinkle.
Picantis.
Hi, Wambus.
Sandopede. Sandopede.